In a future America ravaged by severe drought, water is a precious commodity, and people will do anything to get it, even kill. Amid this desolation, the Holm family clings to their farm, with Ernest Holm holding on to the hope that their land will flourish again with a bit of water. Ernest remembers the days when their fields were green, but his son, Jerome, has never seen it like that. One day, their harsh reality hits home when two thieves try to break into a small building on their farm, attempting to burn down the lock. Ernest catches them in the act and opens fire. In the ensuing chaos, one thief is killed while the other begs for mercy, claiming he was misled into thinking there was water inside. As he reaches for his pants, supposedly to relieve himself, Ernest notices the glint of a gun and shoots him. 2. Jerome, watching from a distance, feels he could have helped, but Ernest, with a paternal firmness, tells him to call him Dad. Ernest then opens the building, revealing an old pump that, to their dismay, yields no water. With their mule exhausted and thirsty, they push onward, eventually encountering the watermen, a group who control water distribution from deep wells through a government deal. Ernest trades supplies for water, always mindful of their dangerous influence. Despite Ernest's pleas for water for his farm, the watermen's prices remain prohibitively high. Tragedy strikes on their way back home when their mule collapses from exhaustion. Ernest, seeing the animal's suffering, shoots it to put it out of its misery, leaving Jerome heartbroken yet insistent he could have done it himself. Back at the farm, Jerome's sister, Mary, serves the military rations, scrubbing the dishes with soil afterward, while Ernest listens to the radio and Jerome sketches animals, their only diversions in this harsh world. That evening, Ernest discovers Mary sneaking out to meet her secret boyfriend. The next day, Ernest and Jerome head to Sam's auction house, where they place a bid on a robot called Simulate Shadow, or Sim, hoping it will take the place of their lost mule. The struggles are relentless, but Ernest's hope for a better future keeps them moving forward. Even in the face of insurmountable odds, Sam's son, Flem, fiercely competes with Ernest in the auction for Sim, but Ernest wins, sinking further into debt. With the auction behind them, they visit the kid's mom, Catherine, in the hospital. Catherine can't walk due to an accident, but the hospital has a special machine that could help her walk again if they could afford it. Despite their troubles, they enjoy a tender afternoon with Catherine before heading home. On their way back, they encounter Robbie and Soz with their baby, trying to evoke pity for handouts. Ernest dismisses them as vultures but later returns with some water for the struggling family. Robbie and Soz are desperate enough to consider selling their baby, but Ernest advises against it, promising to help them with water. Back at the farm, Flem appears, revealing he is Mary's secret boyfriend. He asks to borrow Sim, promising to pay rent, but Ernest refuses without a guarantee from Sam. Offended, Flem storms off, vowing that Ernest will never irrigate his land. With Sim's help, Ernest and Jerome make good time during their next meeting with the watermen. Ernest starts persuading them to consider installing a water line to his farm. Later, he begins digging out the old pump for the watermen to inspect. As they work, Ernest encourages Jerome to get out and socialize, but Jerome is committed to his family's needs. On their way home, they see Flem speeding by. At the farm, Mary uses a vacuum cleaner with a cleaning agent to wash clothes. When Ernest arrives, he forbids her from going out anymore. Mary lashes out, claiming she's old enough to make her own choices. She accuses Ernest of hating her and loving Flem before trying to run away. Mary bumps into Jerome and asks him for money, giving Ernest enough time to catch up and stop her. She cries, accusing Ernest of failing their family. In a desperate attempt to protect her, Ernest locks Mary up and nails her window shut. One morning, Ernest and Jerome wake up to find that Sim has been stolen. Ernest suspects Flem and heads to his house, only to learn from Sam that Flem left for the mountains earlier that day. It turns out Ernest's farm used to belong to Sam, and Flem is obsessed with reclaiming what his family lost, even though Sam believes the land is infertile. Determined to get Sim back, Ernest ventures into the mountains. Suddenly, he's ambushed and knocked out. When he wakes up at the watermen's camp, they accuse him of stealing their supplies using Sim. Despite Ernest's denials, the leader, Caleb, attacks him. In the ensuing struggle, Ernest grabs Caleb's knife and a rifle, shooting in the air to keep the others at bay before escaping. On his way home, Ernest finds Flem asleep by a fire with Sim nearby. It becomes clear that Flem stole the machine and supplies to frame Ernest. At dawn, Ernest wakes Flem at gunpoint, tying him to Sim, who carries the stolen supplies. They trek under the scorching sun, with Flem taunting Ernest about Mary. In frustration, Ernest pulls the rope, making Flem fall. Both men become dangerously thirsty, and Flem convinces Ernest to stop for a drink. The supplies turn out to contain alcohol, not water. Ernest, struggling with his addiction, becomes drunk. Flem, feigning cooperation, confesses that he only stole Sim to survive and offers Ernest money, which he refuses. As Ernest tries to stand, the alcohol makes him dizzy, and Flem seizes the moment, striking Ernest with a rock. Ernest hits his head on a cliff and falls unconscious, flashing back to Catherine's car accident, caused by his drinking. When Ernest regains consciousness, he's tied to Sim, and Flem is pouring more alcohol into his mouth, screaming like a madman. Flem then heads to the farm, where Mary eagerly joins him on his bike to escape. Jerome, worried about his father, sets out to find him. By nightfall, he reaches the waterman's camp. They tell him that Ernest died in an accident with the machine. Heartbroken, Jerome returns home for the funeral. Mary, ridden with guilt, comes back, and the siblings mourn together. They must also face the painful task of informing their mother. Flem picks them up in his truck and takes them home. Overcome with anger, Jerome starts smashing Sim with a hammer, but Flem intervenes. He tells Jerome that grief is hard, but they can't let it destroy their source of income. He offers to become the new head of the family, promising to help the siblings navigate their harsh reality. He also shocks Jerome by announcing that Mary is pregnant. Flem has big plans for the farm, and despite his reservations, Jerome agrees to let him try. That afternoon, Flem takes supplies to the waterman and persuades Caleb to install a water pipe on the farm. At first, Caleb refuses, but when Flem blames him for Ernest's death, citing Caleb's rifle and knife found with the body, Caleb, scared of potential consequences, agrees to divert water to their land. A few days later, the new farm pump is officially installed. Flem works tirelessly to plant and grow wheat, watered by sprinklers. The family now enjoys actual showers, a luxury they haven't had in years. Weeks later, Jerome is astonished to find a small leaf sprouting from the ground. Soon, the entire land is covered in lush, green plants. To celebrate, Flem and Mary get married, tattooing each other's initials on their hands. During the wedding party, Flem drinks and reflects on Ernest's death. A couple of days later, Sam arrives at the farm with 2 bank representatives. Ernest's debt is enormous, and they demand Flem pay it off. Trying to appear tough, Flem scares the horses with his bike, but Sam chastises him, explaining that Ernest kept the land only because no one else wanted it. With the new water supply and thriving crops, the bank can now sell the land if Flem doesn't pay up. That night, Flem loads Sim onto his truck and picks up Robbie and his baby, pretending they're just getting price estimates. Flem betrays Robbie by selling the baby without his consent. When Robbie demands his baby back, the buyers open fire, killing Robbie. They also shoot at Flem, who fires back and flees, abandoning Sim. During the shootout, Sim is damaged and switches to a mode that guides it back to its original factory. The next day, Flem uses the money from selling the baby to pay the bank, but he lies to the siblings, claiming he sold Sim to Robbie. Meanwhile, Sim makes its way to the city and is found by its builder, Calvin. Upon examining Sim, Calvin finds the owner's information and contacts the farm. Jerome picks up the call and becomes suspicious, so he rushes to the local market. There, he sees Flem talking to Soze, who is holding a doll, pretending it's her baby. Jerome approaches them, but Flem quickly ushers Soze away. Later at the farm, Jerome questions Flem about Robbie, but Flem lies, saying Robbie took Sim and abandoned his family. Determined to uncover the truth, Jerome tells Flem he's going to visit his mother but instead takes a bus to the border. However, the guards refuse to let him pass since he's a minor without a guardian. Just then, a woman named Anna approaches Jerome, offering to help him cross the border for a fee. Jerome agrees, and Anna hides him in a truck full of chickens. In a few hours, the truck reaches the city, and Jerome reunites with Anna, who guides him to the factory, taking only half the agreed payment. She explains the round trip is a scam. No one will stop him from leaving the city. Before parting ways, Jerome asks if she knows anyone named Ernest, but Anna doesn't recognize the name. Jerome then meets Calvin at the factory. Calvin shows Jerome all the functions of Sim and reveals that Sim's eyes are cameras designed to capture the landscape for reforestation. These cameras have recorded everything Sim has seen. Calvin teaches Jerome how to access the footage and gives him some privacy. Jerome becomes emotional as he sees his father again through Sim's recordings. But his sorrow turns to horror when he discovers Flem killed Ernest. The footage reveals that Flem tied Ernest to Sim and sent it towards the waterman's camp, making it look like an accident. Heartbroken and furious, Jerome breaks down in Calvin's office. Meanwhile, back at the farm, it starts raining for the first time in over a decade. Jerome returns home, keeping his newfound knowledge a secret for now. He casually asks Flem how Sim returned, and Flem, confused, checks the barn, shocked to find Sim there undamaged. Flem speculates that Robbie must have returned it out of guilt. A few days later, Jerome visits Catherine for real and promises to take care of her like Ernest did. One afternoon, Flem and Jerome are hunting animals to protect their crops. Flem misses every shot and blames the rifle, handing it to Jerome. Jerome, tempted to shoot Flem, instead aims at a deer, proving that the rifle works fine and it's Flem's poor aim. Back at home, Jerome hides the rifle in his room. During lunch, Jerome casually mentions that he got a call from Robbie, who is looking for Flem. This unnerves Flem, who snaps and accuses Jerome of lying. Mary scolds Flem for his outburst, and Jerome insists he's telling the truth. Frustrated, Flem storms out of the room. The next day, Flem receives a letter, supposedly from Robbie, asking to meet at the cliffs because he's in trouble. The letter was actually written by Jerome. Before leaving, Flem looks for the rifle, but Jerome claims he took it to the shop for repairs since Flem said it wasn't working well. Flem, unable to argue, apologizes for his outburst and grabs a knife before heading to the cliffs with Sim. At the cliffs, Flem calls out for Robbie but suddenly falls into a hidden pit, breaking his legs. In pain, Flem begs Sim for help, but the machine doesn't understand. Jerome appears, holding a rock, and silently watches Flem, revealing that he knows the truth about Ernest's death. Flem desperately pleads for mercy, but Jerome remains silent, letting Flem suffer under the scorching sun. Flem, in agony, begs Jerome to think of Mary and the baby, launching into a long speech about accidents and regret. His words only fuel Jerome's anger. And finally, Jerome shoots Flem, killing him. When Jerome returns home, he tells Mary that Flem abandoned her and keeps the truth about Ernest's death to himself. With the money from their crops, they can now afford real food and decide to buy the machine that will allow Catherine to come live with them. Jerome erases all the footage from Sim, ready to start fresh and leave the past behind.